Hey guys, Anthony here. Just going through this. I'm building a race quad right now. It's a QAV 250 with 2208 motors. It's got an OS Doge, Naze 32 flight controller, Kiss ESCs. And I'm working on soldering these Kiss ESCs right now, and I found that there's actually a lot of people that are trying to build quads with Kiss ESCs, and they're just having issues with the ESCs. Like, they're having reliability problems. They're just having all sorts of issues with the ESCs, and a lot of blame has actually gone out on the ESCs themselves. You know, people are like, oh, they're not reliable, or they're no good. And I just want to set the record straight that I think that if you solder these properly, that they are reliable. So I'm going to solder one up for you now, so you can see how I do it. So the first thing that I do is I make sure that my solder tip's nice and clean. I use nice thin 0.022 inch diameter 6236-2 rosin core solder. This is from Radio Shack. But that's key for this. I don't use too much flux because this solder's got some nice flux in it. But the first thing that I do on these Kiss ESCs is I actually go through and pre-tin all the pads. Even though these are pre-tinned from Arduino, they are still in need of some flux, and it just makes it a lot easier. You can use a lot less heat if you just go through and tin the pads first. So I'll just do that right now. It doesn't take very much, but this is a very, very important step to getting this ESC to work. And you'll notice I have to clean my tip quite often. And it really does not take much solder to tin those. Let's see if I can zoom in on this next one here so you can see again just how little it takes. If you don't do this, then you have problems once you get your wires on here. You won't be able to get your wires to easily adhere to these pads, and what happens is a lot of people end up overheating the entire thing, and then these end fets here get disturbed, and then that causes reliability issues, because if these get too hot they move around, then you can have shorts, and then the whole thing can just go. So you have to bear with me because I'm soldering this in order for you to see, so it's kind of difficult to get in there, but you'll notice too that if the solder gets real sticky, it's because it's starting to get dirty and you need to add more flux, either with solder flux paste or just by adding more solder to it. But that's all that takes there. So once I have that done, then I'll do the same thing to the wires. So I'm using these prefabbed wire kits from QuadQuestions.com, and they just come with all of the leads necessary. So there's shrink wrap in these, there's 16 and 18 gauge wire, and this quad is going to use 6-inch propellers, so that means that I'm going to use the 16 gauge or the thicker wire that comes with this. So again, the first thing that I do is I tin the end of this wire even though it's pre-tinned, you've got to do it again just to get some flux on there and to get it so that the heat easily flows between the wire and the ESC. So once I do that, then I can come in and just get my wire set on top of the ESC, heat up the wire and the pad at the same time. And get a nice flow. You can see just how incredibly tiny these are. And I really think that all of the reliability issues that you hear about these things is because the soldering on these is just delicate. I mean, look at the size of the ESC compared to my thumb. My thumbs aren't that big. This ESC is just really tiny. And again, you know, you're soldering in here close to these other components. And if you get too much heat in here, you can have components slip off the board, move around. Like I said, these end fets here, if they get too hot and move, then the whole ESC can be compromised, and then you see sometimes fires in here and things because there's a direct short. Another thing that you need to be careful of when you solder these is solder blobs. Sometimes if you have too much heat or if you're not applying your solder right, you can have your solder explode. When it does that, it can leave solder blobs all through here, which can cause shorts, which cause fire on these ESCs. So again, that's just something to think about. We offer a soldering service on these if you buy them from our website at QuadQuestions.com. I'll do this for you. It's like $4 an ESC, and it's a great deal if you consider what you're equipped to do in your tooling and your skills. So once you have this first wire soldered on, the next thing that you need to do is get in here and solder on your servo leads. So I'm just going to measure out my servo lead really quick. These come with the kits. Okay, so I measured out my length here. Just use my tool. And then strip the ends here. You can get these ultimate wire strippers at QuadQuestions.com. I've sourced them just for hobbyists like you and me. So now that I've got these ready to go here, again, I'll pre-tin them. Now that these are pre-tinned, it's tough in here because you've got this negative lead, which is your ground reference, right next to your positive wire here. So it's just, you know, an act of really good soldering skills in order to get these soldered on right. Usually I use a helping hands with this, but for today's example, I'm trying to do this without. So once I have both wires tinned up, and I have the pad tinned up on this ESC, I will just get in here, get the wire situated right on top, and then just apply my heat directly down. And that's all it takes. And then I visually inspect to make sure that there's no soldered bridge across the two. But again, it's very close. So now that I've done the ground, I'll do the signal wire. Try to do this so that you can see. again, once I get the wire directly on top of the pad, I just hit it with some heat, and once it melts down, I'm out of there. And then finally I move to the ground wire. And with the ground wire, again, even though they come pre-tinned, I like to hit it again with some solder, because you can see just, it's like they use really high temp, high melt solder on these, and they just don't flow very nice. So now that I've got that pre-tinned up, I can just go in here and place this guy on the edge, heat up the wire, and then once the wire melts, move down to the pad. Again, helping hands really helps with this job. And then inspect once it's done. And while it's not the prettiest, it will do for the purposes of this video. So the next thing that we do after we get that all installed is we grab our shrink wrap. And I like to put the shrink wrap on the ESC next. Just like that, over these wires. And I don't shrink this right away. I actually will solder up the other side of this with the motor, then slide the shrink wrap on, but don't shrink it. And once I have them all set up, I will then test the rotation, and if the rotation needs to be changed, then I can easily slide this down a little ways and then just apply my solder there on jumper 2, and that will change the motor rotation. So now I'll put this on the quad. Okay, so again you can see that I've already pre-cut these wires coming off of this 2208 motor and stripped and pre-tinned the wires here. And so now I'll just zoom in and let you guys watch. This side is easier, but it still takes making sure that you have your pins pre-tinned before you try it. So I like to just line up my ESC in a way where you can see how it just lines up with that wire there. And then again, I just come in, get the wire on top of the ESC, give it some heat, and then that's all it takes. So I'll do that with wire number 1, and then we'll do the same with wire number 2. Again, I come in here on number 2, and it doesn't take much heat, so you just melt the wire, let it melt the pad underneath. Once you see it flow, that's all it takes. And see how this peaked up a little bit, so it just needed a little bit more solder just to give it some flux. So then again, the last wire comes in here, and you just hit the wire with heat, let it get the pad, and that's it. So again, the key on these is just to be very careful, make sure you pre-tin everything first before you solder it, and then use minimal heat so that you don't damage your end FETs or your processor. So I'm about ready to fly. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. This is Anthony with Quad Questions.